Zelenskyy meets Trump in Washington today. Yes, to sign the mineral deal. So we'll look into what is going on deeper, who is who and who gets what in this deal. Another topic is Turkish imports of Russian oil dropped nearly fourfold after new sanctions. We investigate the reasons behind it. In a Blitz interview with Timothy Ash, Associate Fellow at the Chatham House think tank. Good afternoon, my name is Henry Keane and we are UATV English and English-speaking Ukrainian state media in constant persuasion to deliver our truth in easy terms for the whole free world, for you, directly from Ukraine. As Kyiv and Washington celebrate agreeing to jointly develop Ukraine's natural resources after weeks of tense negotiations, the deal still has a long way to go before the money actually starts flowing. First of all, it was us, Ukraine, who offered the deal. It was President Zelenskyy and his team who offered it to Americans, and they obviously had a plan. And the plan is working.
It's definitely much better compared to what we saw before. I don't see any traps, but we need to reach a final conclusion. Oleksandr Merezhko, member of the Ukrainian parliament.
Officials, experts, and those close to the deal say the current version of the agreement is an improvement to the earlier one. But they caution this is just the first step to more negotiations rather than a concrete deal. And with no signatures yet on paper, things could change in the coming days. After weeks of back and forth, Kyiv and Washington actually agreed on a deal on February 25th. A final draft of the agreement dropped Ukrainians' major objections, including a demand for Kyiv to fill $500 billion reconstruction fund and $2.1 investment clause for Kyiv, to double the aid given by the US. The agreement will create a reconstruction fund, now to be jointly managed by Kyiv and Washington. Ukraine's state-owned enterprises involved in mineral deposits like oil, gas, and hydrocarbons, as well as infrastructure like liquefied natural gas, terminals, and ports, will contribute 50% of the future revenue to that fund. The contributions would then be invested in Ukraine, at least annually, with goal to encourage foreign investments flowing into the country's natural resources area. Just the publicity around the fund will bring Ukraine to the attentions of average US investors, says Sergei Fursa, Deputy Managing Director at investment firm Dragon Capital. Well, the current draft of the agreement reads more like a memorandum of understanding than an international treaty, meaning it is neither politically binding nor requires ratification by Ukrainian parliament, but a second fund agreement mentioned in the draft deal that is set to be negotiated next will require parliamentary approval. At this point, the agreement is mainly symbolic to show that Kyiv and Washington remain committed to achieving common goals, says Edward Chaw, a non-resident senior associate at the Center of Strategic and International Studies. Trump likely imagines private American companies that will come into Ukraine and get first pick on investment projects, right? Again, it was Ukraine that initially offered up its critical mineral deposits to Trump, promising to have trillions of dollars worth of raw materials buried in the subsoil. And it is true. Also true that Ukraine's underinvested mining sector is craving a deal that could bring American capital, technology, and innovation. With the current agreement encompassing all the natural resources, including the obviously more lucrative oil and gas sectors, critical minerals have become less relevant. The agreement's lack of secure investment guarantees into mineral mining concerns some.
As an extractive industries association, we would like to see real guarantees of development in the mineral sector in Ukraine, like exporting resources, developing infrastructure, or even geological investigations here made by the United States. George Popov, a research analyst at the National Association of Extractive Industry of Ukraine.
Focusing on new deposits rather than the current mines would be a positive step, as would privatizing some of the mining companies. But there is one and only ingredient of a deal that actually makes it the deal, and not rather a letter of intent of sorts, and this ingredient is obvious. It is just a long-lasting peace in Ukraine. Amongst all the crazy stuff happening on planet Earth this week, it went rather unnoticed how Turkish imports of Russian crude oil have quietly plummeted since harsher sanctions were imposed earlier this year. Trump may talk things and even lash out at Starmer, and particularly in the UK in general, which remains a talk show and does not change facts. The US and UK passed sweeping sanctions against Russia's oil sector back on January 10th and did not lift them, targeting Moscow's shadow fleet of tankers. And it is working. Shipments of Russian Urals sounds quite edge-funny, right? Russian Urals, the country's flagship crude oil, have dropped to a low not seen since December 2022. Turkish imports of Urals fell 0.24 million tons in February, down from 1 million tons in January. Turkey's top refinery, Turkey Petrol Refinery, a Tupaz part of the company, has completely stopped accepting shipments from Russian crude, demanding that they comply with the $60 per barrel G7 price cap now. And this dramatic, to say the least, change in policy came right after the January 10th sanctions. Well, the drop in Turkish demand for Russian oil has impacted, obviously, operations at Russian Gazprom Neft and Surgutneftgaz, major Russian oil and gas companies, and has affected over 180 tankers of the so-called shadow fleet, a large group of vessels Russia uses to circumvent Western sanctions. By affected, I mean not working and not delivering any oil at all to fill Putin's war chest. And who could ever thought it is possible, amidst all these sanctions on Russian oil, Turkey just turns to other producers. Ta-da! Turkish imports oil from Africa reached a 5-year high just this February. Turkish imports of Nigerian Forcados blend oil reached 0.26 million tons in February, the highest amount the nation has purchased from Nigeria since 2020. The country imported 0.36 million tons of Liberian S-Cider and Amna grade oil in February, compared to only 80,000 tons in January. It's a 4-fold increase. Turkey has been long singled out as one of the main facilitators of circumventing sanctions imposed in Russia by the West over the invasion of Ukraine. And in November 2024, the European Union's anti-fraud agency actually opened an investigation case into the possible, let's put it straightforward, obvious exporting of rebranded Russian oil via Turkey into the EU. So Turkey, a member of NATO, has been pursuing a standalone Russia policy since Russia's full-scale invasion began, retaining kind of mediator role between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Russian and US officials held talks in Istanbul on February 27th in their second round of direct discussions this month. Ukraine was not a topic of the discussion. The US, the State Department said. But that's okay for Ukraine, while the sanctions are working. Someone as experienced as Timothy Ash himself, would you believe that, is with us tonight in our studio at UATV English. Hello, Mr. Ash.
Hello, great to be here.
Well, just before we start, did anyone ever tell you that your name makes you a perfect nuclear apocalypse economist, like Timothy Ash on a Judgment Daily in a Fallout talk show? Timothy, how are we not doing good these days? I mean, well, maybe it's barely a joke, but the question still remains. Minerals deal. How good are we doing in terms of Ukraine? Or are we not doing too good by signing it? What's your personal opinion, and as an expert?
Look, I mean, my initial thought was, it was genius initially, I think, from Zelenskyy team to kind of bring this up. I mean, I've covered Ukraine 40 years. I mean, I'd never heard of $11 trillion of rare earths. So it was good to kind of get the Americans interested. I mean, in a way, the narrative then began to escape from the Ukrainian side, right? We had the Besant trip to Kyiv. I mean, that crazy contract that gave Ukraine nothing in terms of what it wanted and seemed to give everything away to the US side. And then obviously there was effort to renegotiate. So that's what we've seen in the last few weeks. And now, I mean, it's a pretty neutral deal, really, in terms of what Ukraine gives away. Still, unfortunately, there is really nothing in terms of what Ukraine wants. I mean, Ukraine wanted something in there in terms of firm commitments, in terms of financing, in terms of security, all those kind of things. They're not in there. I mean, the plus, I guess now, is there's an opportunity for Zelenskyy to get to the White House, to sit down with Trump, to look into his eyes and to push for, specifically for those kind of things that Ukraine wants. And it's a meeting between Zelensky and Trump before the Putin-Trump meeting as well. I think that's kind of important.
Right.
So it's kind of quality time between Zelensky and Trump. And Zelensky can figure out whether, Trump's really serious, right? I mean, if he goes into that meeting and figures out that Trump really is not going to give Ukraine anything, then Zelensky needs to look to plan B. What are the alternatives for Ukraine if really Trump is going to sell Ukraine totally down the river?
But do you believe these same things are really coming from Trump? Do you believe that Trump really genuinely wants to end the war in Ukraine in a fair and just and long-lasting way?
Well, look, yeah, I guess he does, but he's not big on detail. I don't think he really understands the Ukraine story very much, right? I mean, I don't think he's really willing to invest a huge amount of time in it. And it's a complicated issue, as we all know. I mean, some of us, Ukraine's been living through it. I mean, I've been covering time, obviously. I don't think he really understands Russia and Putin. I don't think he really gets Putin's obsession with Ukraine. I think, unfortunately, Trump does live in this Russian disinformation space, as Zelensky said, right? I mean, a lot around Trump, I think, pro-Russian, and this idea that it's all about NATO. It's Ukraine's fault. It's about NATO membership push. I mean, it's just total bullshit, right? We all know that. The reason Russia invaded is Putin doesn't accept Ukrainian sovereignty. I mean, I think that should be obvious, right? And it's a bit worrying that the Trump guys and Trump himself don't really understand that, right? So I worry. And, if you don't understand that Putin will go in again, his whole agenda is weakening Ukraine, getting a poor deal for Ukraine so he has the opportunity to go in again. If you don't understand that from the out, I'm not sure the Trump guys are really going to give Ukraine the kind of assurances that they really need.
I would love to ask many more questions in this regard, but we just don't have enough time for that. So let's just smoothly slide to economy, sanctions, Turkey. All of a sudden, is sanctions abiding country? How come? I mean, like Russian Urals crude oil flow falls fourfold. So it drops dramatically after they took to Americans, actually, on 10th of January. So why, all of a sudden?
Well, look, I mean, you can paint a scenario, really, where a peace deal that global markets assume will mean lots more supply of Russian commodities to global markets could actually drop, global oil and commodity prices, which ultimately will be bad for Russia. There's so many uncertainties out there. I mean, sanctions policy, will the Americans drop sanctions? What will Europe do? Will they continue to carry on with sanctions?
Right.
Will international go quickly back into Russia? It's going to be pretty complicated. I sense, international business will be slow really to go back with real investments in Russia, given the terrible experience they've had in the last 3 years.
Going back to Trump, I just can't help myself. So, little prehistory. I mean, there's a term in mathematics. It's called modularization. It's when you just drop the sign. Plus or minus doesn't matter anymore. You drop it, and what matters now is the main module of a number, of a formula, or a matrix, whatever. So, modularizing Trump, what do we see with plus and minus? Sanctions on Russia, not lifted. Even somewhat strengthened by Europe, but still. America and Ukraine are getting closer in every way, politically, militarily, but the minerals deal, but arguably more or less favorable for the parties, but it brings the parties closer without a doubt. But military aid from the US, not stopped to Ukraine. Shells and equipment are coming, maybe even double-fold. So UN resolution on Ukraine. Looks like the US is on the Russian side, but I have a hard time believing that UN has found its dignity and free will, and all of a sudden takes an independent decision without consulting with the US first. So my question, Mr. Ash, modularizing Trump, do you believe that he and his team are playing some sort of a deeper disguised international game in everything they do, or am I flattering Trump and just wishful thinking here?
I think you're probably flattering Trump. There's been lots of people that have tried to put words into Trump's mouth in terms of the big peace deal. Keith Kellogg and Fred Fleitz wrote that piece in mid-24, the kind of Trump peace deal. I don't think Trump thinks like that, right? I think there are guys in the Trump administration, the guys like Tucker Carlson, Navarro, Steve Bannon,
Right.
who basically, I think, see everything through a US-China hegemonic battle, right? And I do think they want a better relationship with Russia because ultimately they think there's going to be war between the Americans and the Chinese, right? And I think they are willing to give Ukraine away, unfortunately, in the context of that. And that puts Ukraine in a pretty weak position. It puts Europe in a pretty weak position. I think actually Europe and Ukraine have some leverage, could have leverage if they're clever.
My next
I mean,
question,
the end,
right.
Well, I mean, if you think of this hegemonic battle, in the end, Europe may be in a weak position at the moment, but it's still a $27 trillion economy. If the Americans are thinking about some long-term military clash with the Chinese, eventually Europe will get its military-industrial complex together. Ukraine already has a pretty serious military-industrial complex, and I think
right.
a $27 trillion economy, which is Europe, is far more important long-term than a $2 trillion Russian economy, right? So, I think, and actually the other thing is a lot of focus on the minerals deal, which, I'm not sure will deliver very quickly to the Americans, but actually arms sales will. Europe is going to increase defense spending inevitably. Ukraine already is a big arm. I mean, Europe needs to get its act together and say, look, to the Americans, in the short term, we want to buy a load of weapons from you, and we'll sign a long-term contract for $500 billion or $1 trillion or whatever it is over the next decade, including arms sales to the Ukrainians. And that's real jobs, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
taxes,
actual exports from the US. And I can't see the Americans really saying no to that. So we need to get on the front foot with something that we can deliver and can do. We need to commit. We need to commit to buy US weapons for a long-term period. And that's, for me, there's a lot of focus on security guarantees and all that kind of, NATO was never realistic for Ukraine, right? There were too many countries going to say no to it. Bilateral security don't really mean anything, frankly, without the NATO backstop. The hard thing is giving Ukraine the weapons to defend itself. You guys have proven able to fight and stop the Russians without enough equipment. If we give you the full range of conventional military capability like Israel gets, I think you can probably defend yourselves, right? So that's what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on giving Ukraine the financing and munitions to be able to defend yourselves, right?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
So that should be the focus, I think.
And I think this is doable in politically and militarily, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the money's not really an issue for Europe. Again, $27 trillion economy. We have $330 billion of immobilized Russian assets in our jurisdictions. We just need to take them, stop the bullshit, right? Take them and allocate them to Europe's defense and Ukraine's defense.
Absolutely.
A 500 billion ticket from Europe for defense is not big, really. It's definitely doable. And if you go to the Americans and say, as I said, $1 trillion arms contract, Trump could never say no to that. So we just think clever. Unfortunately, Europe, lacks leadership, lacks, vision. It's run by bureaucrats, unfortunately. They don't see the big kind of picture. Ukraine's defense is existential to Europe's defense, right? We need to figure that out pretty quickly. And the best defense for NATO now is the best defense for European NATO is not the US, it's Ukraine.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ash. Brilliant expertise. I just enjoyed the time of our conversation. I hope that we can do that again. I have lots of questions for you. Thank you so very much.
Good to speak to you. Bye-bye now.
Well, goodbye. We talk. Well, that was it for tonight. My name is Henry Keane, and we are UATV English, an English-speaking Ukrainian state media, and a constant, trust me, persuasion to deliver hard truth in easy terms for you, for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. So please like, share, and comment. Your voice matters, as it in turn helps Ukrainian voice to be heard globally. Stay safe, and come over and join us at Weekly. Goodbye.